You know, these leaders have prepared. They want to make sure that they're sharing stuff that's pertinent to you. And
he's going to literally
you know, what they say and what you do matters. I'm going to tell you a quick little anecdotal story about somebody that I had a conversation with. So please pay attention when I share this with you, because this story is very meaningful. How many of you at times feel overwhelmed? How many of you feel overwhelmed? Raise your hand if you feel overwhelmed at times. I want the person who I spoke to the other day on the phone to look around the room. Raise your hand high if you feel overwhelmed. The majority of you. Your job is not easy. I personally have no worries about Rocket Mortgage replacing you. This is the one. Because Ryan McDonald and what he does in the local market matters. What Troy Williams does matters. What you do matters. Yes, we're using social media to cast a wide net, but it's still hyper-local. And how you conduct yourselves and the way you conduct yourselves is uber critical. Make no mistake about it, as you grow your business, you're going to end up letting certain people down. And you don't want that to happen because you guys care so deeply. But it will happen. And you need to recover, and recover quickly. Because as I shared with that individual the other day, I said, look, you had a phenomenal quarter. How many families, how many individuals did you help? And he answered, you know, numbers, forgive me, the numbers are off a little bit, but roughly helped 50, 60 people as an individual loan officer. And there was about 10 that beat him up pretty good. And he took it personal. And it hurt him because he cares so much. And my heart broke because I've been there, done that. And that's why I asked all of you to help. That's why these meetings are so important. I asked all of you to raise your hand if you felt overwhelmed. The individual just was helped immensely by seeing his group, his social team, his teammates admit that they've gone through the same thing. But what I reminded him of is that means that there were 40 individuals, 40 families, plus double that amount of realtors, title officers, escrow officers, appraisers, home inspectors, that all benefited greatly from his time away from his loved ones. The time that he sacrificed was not in vain. So what you do matters, and never forget that. You guys are uber powerful, and you make a difference every single day, and I'm going to repeat that over and over and over again until it's drilled into your head how critical it is that you guys get out there and serve for success. Now, you do some of that more easily because of our next guest, our next presenter, our boss, one of the owners of this company. He'll be introduced properly, I'm sure, later on when the owners get up and wrap up the day before we go to the baseball game. But I do want to just say this. We are so blessed to have somebody who was one of the original founders of First Magnus, the CFO. He's brilliant. I would say he's a savant when it comes to all things capital markets and beyond. His politics sometimes are screwed up, but that's okay. We love each other and we have great debates. I'm teasing him, but he loves it. All I got to do, Gary's very easy to spin out. If you want to have after I have a couple cocktails tonight, just ask me how to spin Gary out. Walk up and watch him just lose his mind when you say a few things. But I will tell you, this guy cares deeply, and he puts in massive hours. This guy starts his day at 4 in the morning, and I'm seeing him email people at midnight. This guy's busting his backside for you, so give a great round of applause for Mr. Gary Malice. I'm going to head down, Gary.
Is this thing on? I can't even tell. Is this thing on already?
Yes.
Oh, wow. We're so efficient around here. All right, so let me get a second to get organized here. I got to see how this stuff works. So I think in theory I have a presentation because my wife made me do one. Normally I don't do one at all, but I got yelled at. So I try to incorporate,
20 minutes ago.
wow, that is blinding. Things that come up in the morning to try to show that I'm paying attention because, as a speaker, you want to make it clear you're actually listening to the other speakers and learning something. So, as I was listening this morning, Chris talked about those 8 things, of which I have 2 or 3 of them. I'm not qualified for most. And he talked about how his mother was so great about driving to excellence. I just want to let you guys know when I was about 12, my parents looked at me and said, "No, mediocre is about right for you." So, so to be clear, I wasn't really pushed very hard. So for the next 30 or 40 minutes, I'll try to sound like I'm greater than mediocre, but the reality is my parents probably were right. And this game's been going on for about 25 years. So, and when you have a group like this, it's fairly intimidating for someone like me. And so even last night, I panicked a little bit. And so I called Chris, and I said, "Hey, I just want to make sure, this little clock thing's kind of cool too." So, wow. So, I want to make sure I was going to cover things that were important to him. This is his show, and as, as owners, it really is important that he gets what he wants and you guys get what you want. And he gave this long 8, 9, and past a minute long answer about what he wanted me to cover. I have no idea what he said, really. I think it was right about when he was cuddling with Paul Lucido apparently last night, and so maybe he just had his mind elsewhere. And so I think I know what he said, but essentially it boiled down to he wants you to know that I'm not an idiot and that we actually think through the decisions we make and that even if they're not ones you love, they're in your best interest, which actually is fairly true, so that's kind of an easy thing to cover because that's actually a fairly accurate statement. The first thing I always tell people is I'm not a production person, although I did play one for a short period of time in my life. I can't say I did run production and actually did originate loans, believe it or not, back in my 20s. And I'm not very good at it. I faked it for a little while. But for the people that truly do it and do it well, it's intimidating for people like us because the reality is your guys' success is fundamentally, while it's driven mostly by what you do, what we do does matter. I caught myself, KP, you can't even catch me on it. So no one else knows what I'm talking about, by the way. So it is important to convey that. So I agree with Chris last night. And so I had to think through what's the best way to convey that in a short period of time. So hopefully I will pull that off. And the good news is I'm locked in a room with you guys for the next 4 hours and then a game tonight until midnight. And so eventually you guys will corner me and tell me what I didn't cover and the things that really piss you off, and that's okay. Just, do it privately, not in front of everybody, because maybe not everyone, is unhappy. So keep it a secret if you are. It's good. Let's see what I do here. I don't know if I'm hitting, what do I click here? What am I aiming at? Do I aim to you? What am I doing? Can you just do it? I can't, I told you, I'm not smart enough. Hey, I have a presentation, woohoo. Okay, I just want to remind everyone, I always say this, we're not a team of one. I have a whole bunch of people that work in capital markets, and as John and KP alluded to, there's a whole other team that works with us. But within capital markets, you guys all know Angie a bunch, I'm certain. She's not here. You don't know Val. Val handles the other side of the capital markets, really the hedge and trading side. And then in the crowd, actually, we have an honorary member. She not really work with us. She really is Robert's right-hand person. But Laura Roush is the greatest, and she's here somewhere. And because we're not really getting into products detail today and so forth, I just didn't want to not mention her because she is here. And sometimes we do things a little more product-centric. Today we're going to do a little more strategic-centric. So it's just a little different of a presentation. So after listening to Chris last night, what I did is I wrote down some things. I have no idea who I'm clicking to. Let's see. Oh, here we go. So what I did is I wrote down kind of 3 questions that I just get a lot of times from you guys, whether it's through the phone calls, whether it's through emails, whether it's when I see you guys in PCAB or wherever. They're just kind of 3 categories that come up. And I think they're all somewhat interrelated, but it's really important to kind of explain them. Because like I said, sometimes you may not agree with what we do, just like kids don't agree with parents sometimes, but you'd like to think the parents do it for the best reasons. And I will say that after doing this for 30 years now, I have seen many short-term, quote-unquote, strategic decisions that did not have well-thought-out long-term plans, and they end badly. and I mean like really badly. And so just to give you some real life pragmatic examples, and I won't give the names, some of them you'll actually be able to peg to names, by the way, but and some of them are really relevant because of what happened last year. I mean, last year was a brutal year for capital markets in some respects. It was actually super fun in some other ways, but in certain periods of the time were actually truly something we'd never ever seen before. And if you hadn't lived through previous mistakes and previous short-term decisions that also were horrible, some companies unfortunately repeated the same ones. And so just to give you some real live examples, and then we'll get into the kind of the presentation. But if you remember back to last March last year, rates kept rallying, going a little crazy. Fed went a little nuts, started buying almost too much paper. And so we had all these crazy margin calls because that's how MBS securities work. If you have forward commitments and the market rallies, they want you to put up a cash deposit to cover if you don't deliver on these mortgage-backed securities. And this happened many, many moons ago. And some companies weren't a fan of paying margin deposits because, well, you know how you have to pay them with cash, with your company. If you don't have enough money, you have to put more money in as owners. And Paul and Robert aren't big fans of putting more than they've already sacrificed all their life to do so. But they did it because it's the right thing to do, and the alternative would be to not take out mortgage-backed securities, which one company chose to do. They thought, here, we'll solve the problem. We'll just let rates keep getting better. We'll be the smart ones. We'll not put in any mortgage-backed security trades. We won't have to put up any margin deposit. We'll be the ones laughing all the way to the bank. And then mortgage rates changed overnight, and they closed down within 48 hours after being open for 10 years and losing over $300 million. And it happens. But the short-term decision for about a couple weeks, they thought they were geniuses. And then they weren't. All right? And so when you see situations like that, or, you know, you can go back to last year, right when things started going really cattywampus, the co-issue market. And the co-issue market, a short answer is just basically you sell your loans to the agencies, you sell the servicing to a specific buyer. That market basically shut down overnight. But there were companies that basically said, co-issue is the way to go. We'll do 100% co-issue. We will deliver everything to the co-issue market. And as soon as it went away, they had only one choice, which was to service all their assets. They didn't have the cash to do so. So what they do, they knocked on all the aggregators' door and said, can we deliver you loans? And they said, yeah, you've been telling us to F off for the last 10 years, not interested. So what happened is when they did that, and then add that to the Fannie issue, which is, hey, no more than 7% investment properties, what happens next? Well, now they get to charge about 800 basis points to do a loan because they have nowhere to go with it. It's great fun. And then the last example would be, if you remember last year, when the aggregator market kind of fell apart, people had to service a whole bunch of loans. And then they think, well, this is so fun, we'll do it forever. Well, what happens when forever lasts longer than they think, which is forever, and it lasts even a year, because in the mortgage business, forever is like 6 months, apparently. So they did it for a while, and of course what happens is then the servicing value drops a little bit. So what happens? They literally have to sell the company because they now have overvalued their company, and they had borrowed against the servicing, and the servicing value dropped, and now they're basically levered. They owe more than the servicing is worth. So what do? They sell their company they had for 30 years because they had no choice. These are all real stories to which you can actually put names to them, since I won't say it out loud, but if you see me privately, I will tell you. These are all 3 stories where people had what they thought were great short-term plans, and in the end, basically lost their company over them. So I do want you to always know, when we think about things, we don't just think about today or tomorrow. We have to think about today or tomorrow and the next year and the year after that. And that's why Paul and Robert have been here for 20 years, which apparently we can't talk about. Don't say anything. Do not congratulate them. It's not worth talking about. It's just all a big lie. But it is a pretty cool accomplishment, particularly from someone that did not pull it off and was part of a fun, well-designed bankruptcy. Woohoo! Great fun. If you ever want to do something that is not fun, manage the wind down of assets during your bankruptcy. But you do learn a whole lot of cool stuff, I will tell you that. So, what are our big 3 questions? Let's see here. Here we go. Okay. Oh, by the way, I had to put this in. This is for Ali, who keeps giving me crap because he doesn't like any of my answers. So, after I finish, and you're not satisfied, I will just tell you it's because I'm really running for mayor, and I'm going to run against Prince Sorensen because we're on apparently opposite side of the aisles. Even though I'm actually closer to his side of the aisle than he realizes, I just like to argue with him because it's fun for me. That being said, okay, I have no idea if you guys can read this. I didn't think this through. I can't because I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see crap. So I clearly did not think this through. But up there are words. And those words matter. At least they mattered last night around 11 o'clock at night when I wrote them. Now I got to figure out what they are. And I'd like to also point out, someone was talking about sleep earlier. Andrea, my wife, who, by the way, also is part of helping with this wonderful event, has got me one of those Oura rings. These things are really cool. It tells you how little you sleep and then yells at you. And I get a lot. I don't even get red anymore. Like, it's actually like on fire. Like, my phone just like screams at me. And last night, I broke a new record. I got 1 minute of REM sleep. 1 minute. That's actually, I think, almost impossible to do. But it was a heck of a dream, just so you know, in that minute. Okay? Okay. So, you guys probably oftentimes are confused because the truth is it's hard to understand why we service what we do, how often, how much, when, where, and why. And it's a fair question, right? And last year presented particularly hard challenges because servicing wasn't such a picnic last year because you basically had a bunch of people ask people to service loans they never had before, and so much, so fast, so furious during a forbearance, during new legislation, and so they weren't particularly great at it. So you may have said, yeah, the servicing idea, I know is a great idea, but don't love it right now. Most of that has kind of worked itself out. Unfortunately, it's a trailing issue, so sometimes the goats take a little bit longer to get back in the barn. But it's a fair question when people ask, why do we do it, when do we do it, and so forth, right? And really, it's a combination of things that matter. And ultimately, the most important for you guys to realize, it's all designed to be what is best to put the best product and consistently for you guys, right? And the reality is, in a time continuum, there's never a point when servicing always is the best. It's just not a fact, right? Because the truth is, cash flows and servicing values are subject to, one, audits, and two, opinions. And not everybody agrees is the first issue, okay? So from an execution standpoint, there are certain products that if we price at X, if somebody else values it 2X, and we think they're right, or better yet, we actually think they're wrong, but they're willing to pay for this, why wouldn't we do that, right? But then you get into a deeper question, which is their value useful to the street, meaning has it made its way? Because they may be paying more, but they also may not be credible. And if it's not going to last, then we get into the issue of, well, can't give you a headway. We're going to give you this great price that lasts for 4.5 seconds. And so one of the questions we deal with, and every loan, just, we go through a process, and it's fairly intricate, but it's also very fast, right? We look at every single loan we look to sell. And we have to look at Fannie, we have to look at Freddie, we have to look at our own servicing value and our own cash flows. We have to look at what someone would buy that servicing for if we sold it to the agencies concurrently. We look at 15 different aggregators. We look at some private banks. And it's all in a matter of minutes that we do this on every single asset we look to sell. And at the same time, we actually look at the pricing of a rate sheet that day. So in other words, we're looking at rate sheets today for loans we sell today to make sure that we're looking to see if there's any crazy deviations looking forward. And so we go back and forth. But the reality is, rarely is any execution the best all the time. That would suggest everybody thinks the same about everything, which is just silly. It's just not reality. And there are so many reasons, for example, with high balance de minimis issues, right? Look at the investment property, the caps, right? Look at some private banks that have to have an axe for CRA requirements. Look at some of the spec pools that are out there. Sometimes that money gets passed on, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes Fannie passes it on directly. In fact, what's interesting is if you look at the whole Fannie issue in terms of this investment property, which is really, a PSPA agreement issue between Fannie Mae and the Treasury. But what's crazy is about 2 years ago, there were people actually paying for loans that you wouldn't even want to sell to Fannie Mae because their LLPAs were so ridiculous that you could actually sell them to the private label security, but the difference is you can't service those assets. So right off the bat, you wouldn't service those even if you wanted to, because we'd be taking away the opportunity for a better price for you guys. And so when people talk about servicing, again, I'm sure it says something like that. Hopefully I'm on message. I'm not sure. Hopefully it's close to what that says up there. But the reality is, you can see it here too. This is so cool. Okay, most people can see it here. I can't even from here. So that just shows you how old I'm getting. So when you talk about servicing, the other piece of it is the things we want to do. You listen to what John Ashley talked about earlier. You look at the things that Robin talked about. Some of the things we want to do cost money. They're investments. And if you tie all your money into servicing, even if it was the best execution, if all your money is tied into servicing, then what? Right? Is it really, when you think about servicing strips and the banks that own them, it's a 6, 7, 8% return. It's a bank interest only return. It's not that exciting. And so mathematically, if you're Paul and Robert and you put all your money in and you do what you did back then 20 years ago and you want to make a return, do you think they really only want to make 6% a year on all that money for that risk, for that effort? I mean, heck, they could just go put it in T-bills and get 1/3 of the way there and do absolutely nothing, not even leave their house. They could stay in their pajamas. And so the origination business has to out-earn the servicing business. And moreover, the capital required to be a successful mortgage bank. Think of all the companies that went public this year. Think of all the companies that brought in a holding company or a PE firm to bring in additional dollars that now have billions of dollars at your disposal. If we put everything into servicing, what else do you have? And so even if it were the best execution, is it your best use of cash? And so when we talk about servicing, now sadly there's kind of this image out there. People believe it. And I think it's more, quite frankly, I don't know that it's much on the retail side. I think it's more an issue on the wholesale side. But there's just this notion, particularly for you guys that are recruiting, and I think it's maybe similar, you guys would know better than myself because you do all the recruiting, is if you don't service, somehow you're not one of the big guys. You're not competent enough. You're not sophisticated enough. The truth is, servicing all is no more sophisticated. In fact, I would argue it's actually less sophisticated. It's actually less effort. And it actually takes away from some of your opportunities. And so the real sophistication is choosing between when to service, when not to, when to sell to aggregators, when to sell to the agencies, when not to sell to the agencies. How do you make sure that you actually use them all as bluffs so you get the best deal from each and every one? If you get too cozy with each and every one and go back to this last 18 months and think what would happen if we didn't have reliable partners in all three of those spaces, which some companies didn't. And look at what some of the retail pricing went to over the last couple of years. Pure mayhem. And so when it comes to servicing, what you have to be able to tell people is we can, and we do when it's in your best interest. And just as an aside, it's interesting, we know there was some servicing issues last year. Look, it's not a secret, I'm well aware of that. And the truth is, it happened for everybody. And so it's funny, because every once in a while we'll get an email from someone that says, hey, servicing is a problem, and they want to do a refi, but they won't do the refi if we service the loan again. It's like, okay, just so you know how many emails we get from people that say they're actually servicing loans somewhere else, and they actually got the loan because someone else is servicing the loan, and they're asking us to do the loan. So, like, it's just kind of one of those things. It was just an ugly game for a while, and it's kind of universal. The last piece I want to just talk about servicing real quick is people often ask why we private label. And it's interesting because obviously when servicing isn't going well and your name's on it, you probably don't love that piece. And we talk about the brand management. Listen to what Paul said this morning. Okay? Listen to Robin. We want our name out there as much as we can. Right? Now I get it. When it's not going well, it seems to not be fun. But let's be clear. It's a chance to talk to your customer without even using any of your CRM tools every single month. When you talk about retention, about getting that loan again the next time around, who wouldn't want their name out there as many times as possible? And the reality, you look at our retention rate for loans that we service, it's actually higher than loans that we don't because our name is out there. And so it's easy to remember negative experiences outweigh positive ones 10, 20, 30 to 1. And so anytime you have a customer that's upset over servicing, of course you're going to remember that. But to be clear, think how many times we've had refinance opportunities because we did have the servicing. Okay? That being said, and I would never say this in front of all three channels, but I particularly believe this for retail. The truth is, I don't care where the loan goes. I really believe that if you've done your job and you handle your business the first time around, I don't care what they try to do, you'll get the loan the next time around. More. Now that being said, if we see people are being uber aggressive, we have some levers we can pull, but we have to be careful because we are selling that asset. And so it is always going to be an ongoing debate. And I get there are people that would say, you know, all things being equal, I'd rather keep the servicing. But just remember, we are trying to help you do as many loans as possible. And the opportunity for refinance still requires either some kind of change in their life or rates dropping or so forth. But overall, the best thing we can do is give you the best product depth and price we can. And so, but we admit there are trade-offs, and there are always going to be fair conversations to have with always not necessarily a perfect answer. Okay? So that kind of covers the servicing story. What is our next most popular question? I don't know. I don't know if I'm not hitting anything or if you guys are doing it. I have no clue what's happening here. Okay. This is the next popular one. Everyone loves this one. Okay? Banking versus brokering. One of the things I want to always tell you is if we don't bank something, it's not because we're lazy. It's not because we don't care. It's not because we think that you're not worth it. The truth is, there are some things that we can't bank well. And we'd actually be doing you a disservice by doing so. In fact, I think it's offensive for people to demand you bank something if it's a product we can't do very well. And there are actually legitimate reasons why brokering is actually better.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, if something is brokered a lot, and we, by the way, study every single loan that's brokered out, and we look at it, and we look at what the commonalities were, and we look to see what kind of demand and what kind of velocity it has. And so, hey, Chris, what time am I supposed to be done, by the way? I forgot.
3:30.
Thank you. So, we do look at it, and it's interesting because there are certain products, and obviously let's take a live example of non-QM. Everyone's anxious to get back on. But one of the things we had to do is we had to make sure we did it better than we did last time. And it was okay last time. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't great. And so this time, and ignoring the fact that it took a little longer because unfortunately you had some warehouse banks that were just crazily not in favor of such things. And so you get to these crazy choices. For example, we could finance it with somebody else. We could sign up a whole new warehouse partner. Bill, I carry Bill's going this afternoon. I'm sure he'd love to have our 10th one. We love already having 9, let me tell you. Having one more is just a picnic and a half, right? Going through one more audit, going through one more set of quarterly financials, going through one more review, right? It's not that simple. Not to mention a non-QM lender charges a bunch more per loan.
You want them to email you.
And they also, by the way, charge more on the funding. And so it's actually more cash. Which again, if we service everything, we wouldn't have that kind of cash, so we can't do such things. But the point is, it is still better to find one of your A lenders to get into the non-QM space with you because it is more accretive for us as a whole to bank with a lender that is actually a lower cost of funds. Because then we don't have to impair our price at all. So then we don't have to subsidize some of the loss. And so you look at warehouse partners. You get into this whole debate about, well, how much does a single underwrite matter to you? What is the risk? If you're Robert Holiday and you say, okay, if we do 20 loans and we screw up 2 of them, what's the exit ramp on those 2 loans? If you go back 2 or 3 years ago, the exit ramp was about 80 cents on the dollar. Now the exit ramp is a little better because non-QM's gone through 2 or 3 years and people have embraced it. And so now at least if you screw up a non-QM loan, you'd sell it for about 94, 93 cents on the dollar. Still not exactly lovely, by the way, since the average loan is $700,000, so you do the math in case you haven't figured it out yet, okay? That's a big loss, okay? It's about 40 grand. And so the question is, how do you price in your parts per million? But the reality is, we'd much rather have a single underwrite and a better experience for you guys and be able to price in that risk as long as we can quantify it and know what it is and model it in. Now, this is an example where I say short-term versus long-term decisions. Somebody else may say, oh, we do the single underwrite, we do everything. We hold the loan, we bulk bid, we do all this great stuff, we'll give you a better price. They might. And then if that market goes to hell in a handbasket, they could literally lose $100 million in about a week. And if you want to go back to 07, it all started with people that did Alt-A and bulk bid it out. And so you have to decide how much of the past you let influence you versus how much you don't. And so when we look at something, the question is, can we do it better than if you could broker and have the same experience? Because part of the problem is, for example, if we don't have control of the process, or you'd be amazed how many lenders say, here's your price if you bank, here's your price if you broker. Let's say it's 10 basis points. You're gonna do a non-QM for 10 basis points? We can't. And so if they don't give us a reasonable margin to work with, then what we're gonna do is give you a worse price just to say we have banking abilities? That's not a partner, right? That's literally being selfish. And so when we look at this, we have to look at who these partners are. Oftentimes we'll get issues with credit unions. That's a popular one. You guys will bring some really good credit unions, and there's some great ones out there, don't get me wrong. They'll put a product out there, particularly on ARMs. Sometimes it's a doctor-only product or what have you. The problem is they come to you and say, we'll work in 2 states, and you can deliver us $4 million a month, and then we're done. It's like, well, that's great, except for I have to replicate that about 60 times for all you guys, and it's completely untenable from an operations standpoint. And so the problem is sometimes it's about their capacity and it's about their volume restrictions. And so the problem is what looks good for a day, that's about as long as it'll last. And so then we put through all the effort, and you want to look at Laura's team goes through with Angie and all that stuff to roll out a new product. If it isn't going to last more than a week, if it isn't really something they have the liquidity for to have and sustain for a long period of time, it's not worth it. Right? But I think sometimes if you're not careful with the way we speak, you guys may hear, you're not worth it. And that's not at all what the message would be. The message is, it's not worth it because by the time we get done, you're going to get one loan on this thing and it's going to be gone. And all the effort we all put into this is going to be a waste. And so one of the biggest questions is it a sustainable product? Okay? And you'd be amazed how many times we come to us. I mean, think about it. Think how many people you recruit against that put out a recruiting rate sheet that's so much better than the rate sheet they're going to get 6 months from now. Think about the game that you guys deal with. We deal with the same game. It's a different kind of game, but it's very similar in a lot of ways. And so we have to decide, is the effort worth it? And is it going to last for you guys? And can we do it well? And so we just want you to know, when we look to add products, what we're really looking for is, can we do it better than you can broker it? And can we do it for a long period of time? And can we manage the risk level to a point, not that we need to be perfect, but that we at least can control the loss to a level that we don't have to price in some stupid price and make your price worse because we're afraid of what can go wrong. We have to at least have some kind of containment on what could go wrong. And so we just want you to know we are always working on brokered product and moving it to bank, but it is a process. And if you look at, when you see this new non-QM come out, I believe it's October 7th, I will tell you this time it's going to be significantly better. I think the two big wins, and there's actually a few wins, but I would say the two biggest ones is it truly is going to be a single underwrite. Like literally it's done by Robert's team with Eugene. They underwrite the file. That's it. You're done. The second thing is there will be a pre-bank statement approval process. It'll first be manual, but we are piloting an actual automated system where you will actually take your image documents and it'll actually go through a portal and it'll actually spit back the answer so you actually will know what the stated income is on a bank statement product. And it'll happen within minutes. And we are already seeing it live. We just need to have some more comfort that they are going to do it for us. But again, this is another great example of you have someone that does it, but they're tied to a buyer. And so the problem is, will they give it to us but not make us sell them every asset? Because we don't want that, because as my friend Ali will attest to, there are many non-QM buyers out there, and I'm sure whichever one I pick will be the wrong one, according to him. And that's okay. Ali, I love you. Okay? But to get some of the things we want, again, life is full of trade-offs. And so we have to trust each other that we're picking certain things. But ultimately, let's be honest, look, I'm as selfish as anybody. I want the technology, but I want the fungibility and I want the best price. But it's not always easy to get to day one. Sometimes you have to work with people and you have to say, okay, well, how much do we have to give you to get this? But when can we start moving away from this? Or when does eventually someone else, as they run out of their time, and you get someone else to replace it that's more neutral, and so you go through this building block process. And we eventually get what is the best bankable product, which is what you guys want, because ultimately that is what gives us the best control for success and service. Okay, what is the next big question? What does it say? Okay, all right, I think I know this one. Okay, so once in a while, you guys have been known to complain about pricing, I've been told. I've heard, okay? Now, no one reaches out directly to me because if you do, Uncle Paul will actually slap you in the hand. So don't do that. You got to go through the channels. Trust me. Once in a while, some of you guys do it anyway. So be it. Okay. Look, one of the biggest things for us is how do we differentiate between what is legitimate versus illegitimate? When I say that, that's never to suggest, because let's be honest, you can have pricing complaints just because someone out there is just a nut. You got a loan officer that just misquoted a loan. You got a loan officer that's a call. I mean, there can be reasons why in your model, in any one of your branches, right, any one of your regions, you could be losing a loan. It may not mean that it's our fault. It could be someone else out of our hands. It could be your margin. It could be our margin. It could be everybody's margin. It could just be a weird day. It could be market time. It could be a million reasons why you may lose a loan over price. So one of the things we want to tell you, and this is, I think, what Chris wanted to get to last night in his conversation with me, is at least share with you that, first of all, we always listen, okay? And even though sometimes maybe, you get enough of them once in a while, sometimes they're not well-founded, sometimes they are, some are more researched than others, but the reality is We know, right, without a shadow of a doubt, that there are models out there that are going to undercut ours. We know that already. Like, and you look at certain Quicken models, you look at some consumer direct models, you look at some loan officers that are making 20, 25 basis points. It's not hard to do the math. But what we do try to make sure is, how do we make sure there's enough for our model to work? And when is there a time that all of us have to give in a little bit? When do we not? And so how do we do that, right? How do we separate out? The first thing I want you to know is we log everyone's information. Anytime you guys tell us stuff, it is actually logged. We look at it by product code, we look at it by rep line, we look at it by FICO, we look at it a bunch of different ways, by loan amount, we look at it by state, because we're trying to aggregate if there's something systematic about the things that come up. In a perfect world, we get the lender too, but sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. We know, I mean, you guys, you're recruiting all the time, you know who you're competing with, who you're not, who's kind of in your model, who's not, but we do look at that as well, right? I sit on a fair amount of advisory committees. This is not me telling you I'm a wonderful human being. I remember I told you I was sold out for mediocrity at 12. I still maintain it's accurate. But oddly enough, there are people that actually think I'm a useful human being. And so I do sit on advisory boards for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and Compass Analytics and the executive board for the Independent Mortgage Bankers, MBA, and a few aggregators. And so I get a fair, believe me, the same complaints we get, you hear them everywhere. Okay. One of the things that we do, we literally track every single day the amount of mortgage-backed securities that are traded. And because one of the first things we're looking for is if we get a fair amount of noise from you guys, the first thing we're looking at is, okay, how is our lock volume today? And more importantly, how is everybody else's today? And how many mortgage-backed securities were traded today? And we actually look at it both in the Ginnie side and the Fannie side, Freddie side as well, Fannie, Freddie, or Ginnie. And we actually look to see, are we an outlier? Because if, for example, the industry did X and we only did Y, then we're already thinking, there may be something to this. If the industry did Y and we did Y, then it may just be, you ran into the wrong guy, the wrong model, the wrong place, so forth. And so one of the things we have built, and KP and John talked about in their presentation, we have an entire data warehouse that we track all this different data. Not the loans we trade, but we also import other trades that go into play every single day. And we track it by volume, and we track it by coupon. We track it by note rate. And we look for certain things to see if other people are doing things that are putting us in a position to jeopardize what we think our model ought to be, right? So I do want you guys to know that we are always monitoring, right, through various data, imports and exports. So it's not just waiting on you guys. We don't just put a rate sheet out there and hope, right? And we see if people complain. Let's see what happens. It's not really how it works, right? Now, that being said, we do get times, right? And, there are certain things that we just know that are always going to come up. For example, we know, I'll give you a little inside information. It's not really inside information. I shouldn't say that word like that. I've already been investigated by the SEC once. Don't want to do it again. But $800 an hour for an SET attorney. Don't recommend it for anybody. But as an example, we issue our rate sheets, about 7:05, or when we actually kind of certify our marks, meaning we look at Ginnie by each coupon, Fannie, Freddie, each coupon, and we certify our pricing about 7:05. We know there are some people that do it around 7:15, 7:20. Some do it at 6:30. Whenever they do it, everyone has their time that they certify the first rate sheet. So we know, for example, if there's a day where the market has slid between 6:30 and 7:05, we're going to pick up the 7:05. Now, conversely, if there's a rally, we'll pick up the rally. So when we look at certain comps, we know there are days when lock volume's higher or lower, and we know we look better. Now, an hour or two later, when everyone does their rate changes, it'll all normalize. But there's always going to be windows. The world isn't perfect, right? Until we move to a world where we actually feed mortgage-backed security into pricing, and we all price live assets, which you guys probably would hate, quite frankly, but it will be done at some point. The truth is there are arbitrage opportunities. So we know there are times when we get noise that we're like, wait till you see the rate sheet comes. Or there's something, you guys look really good today. And we're like, yeah, got the right time today. Lucky us. Wasn't really any skill we did. It's just, we're like computer programs. We're really kind of boring when it comes to secondary pricing. So, but we do want to let you know, we do a heavy amount of analysis on our own. And so anything you send us, it is stored, it is noticed, and there are times when we do agree, and Paul, Robert, and I keep you to sit down and say, hey man, the industry is changing a little bit, we have to look at some things. Or, hey, people are starting to put PLS money into the street, we need to change our investment prices. Right? So we do study it by FICO bands, we look at Ginnie individually, we look at everything. And so know that while I listened to Robin's presentation this morning, and the truth is, there are going to be loans, again, model-based issues.
remote?
But there are going to be who you are competing with, you're recruiting with, and if you have real issues, you know that we are listening. And so the moral of the story, in the end, is we care deeply. In fact, these guys probably think I care sometimes too much and make myself too accessible, but I really believe we have to. One of the things that separates us, I'd like to think, is your guys' ability to have a voice in all things. Why we do what we do, and more importantly, if we don't do something, giving you an answer that's useful to your consumer base. And knowing that we don't just think about today, we think about 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what is the best to strategically put you in the best spot? And that's kind of what we do in capital markets. So that's it. Because it's 3:30, I can see it. Right there, 3:30.
You never disappoint at all.